Welcome to Spark Series. We are so glad that you're joining us here. This is our June Spark Series on AI and ethics, and boy, do we have an incredible lineup cast for you today. So we are going to jump right in. If you've never attended one before, we do have a live audience if you're watching this later on YouTube. And so the live audience gets to engage with our panelists when we're all finished. And super excited to see where our conversation goes. So with that, I will introduce myself first. My name is Diane Temple. I'm the president and CEO of the Idaho Technology Council. Our North Star is that we are driving tech growth in Idaho. As we travel across the state, we host events, we help with programs, we work with our partners, and we truly want to be that super connector that it connects industry, government officials, education, and all the things technology and those that use technology. So super excited to be here. I'm going to volley it over to my panelists, and I would ask that they introduce themselves. And then I want them to answer one question as we kind of roll off this. So who you are, kind of what you do, and then what does ethical AI mean to you? So we're going to start with that part. Just what does it mean to you? And Anka, ladies first. We'll have you go, then we'll have Katya, then we'll follow up with Corey and Alberto.
Well, hi, Diane. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. My name is Anka Patton Trifan, and I am the CEO of Trifan Events. I am an AI educator, also AI advisor to the University of San Francisco, and an AI builder that is working across business, live events, and technology. At Trifan Events, we build AI systems, not just for the business, but also for the global event industry. And we have a few solutions out there that we have taken to market. But I also, as an AI educator, I do get to speak at events quite a bit. And via the platform, which is my podcast, Events Demystify Podcast, I do entertain a lot of live conversations in the event technology and AI space. So a lot of the things that I'll be talking about today, they kind of come from my perspective that is informed not just by building these tools, but also having to make real decisions about where does AI fit in? How does it help? Where does it need limits, right? And who remains accountable when it acts? To your question, I think we first need to start with the reality that AI is already inside a lot of organizations, and whether the leadership has made a strategy around it or not. And there's a lot of employees that are using AI not just to summarize documents or draft emails, but really to take a lot of the task that they have to do and gain a little bit more efficiency and productivity. So I think leaders are under a lot of pressure when it comes to adopting AI, and they have to deciding like, what does it mean for us? What does it mean for our organization? How does it impact us? So when I think of ethical AI, I think about deciding before deployment what authority looks like, and where is it given? What information can it access, who is affected by the output that AI generates, and which human owns the consequences when something goes astray. I do build a lot of AI systems and agents, so I definitely see the value there, but I think there's a real difference between AI helping prepare work and AI acting in my name, right? So that's where responsible AI fits in the conversation. So super excited to be a part of this and also hear what everybody else has to say.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Katia Guerra and thank you Diane for having me here. It's just a pleasure. I am an assistant professor at Boise State. I teach at the College of Business, IT and Supply Chain Management Department, and I mostly teach business intelligence, data analytics and data management for undergraduate and graduate student. My research is mostly focused on AI implementation, and so a big part of my research is indeed related to your first question and how organization can implement AI but still be compliant with ethics. And so what ethical AI means to me, it means basically follow general ethical principle like justice, fairness, even privacy. And I think this is important for business leaders because it creates trust. And so it creates an environment where stakeholders can trust organization. Yeah.
Great. All right. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here with you today. I'm Corey Carone. I am an attorney at Stoll Reeves here in Boise, Idaho. I am a commercial litigator, so that means I primarily work on business disputes. I use AI a lot personally just in my practice of law, but more and more as our clients are starting to implement AI into their workflows, helping advise clients and help them think through what are the issues that AI is potentially creating in our organizations and how do we manage those issues. And so for me, ethical AI is kind of centered on two principles. The first one is that human judgment should always play in a role in how decisions are made in your organizations, particularly decisions, I guess, including decisions about how to use AI. And I think the second principle is that the leaders who are exercising the judgment to make those decisions should be doing so with the goal of using AI as a tool to assist human organizations in solving human problems. I think a lot of the topics we're going to cover today, things like business, law, public policy, healthcare, those are all structures and systems that we've created to address basic human needs. How do we efficiently allocate scarce resources? How do we guarantee freedom and equality? How do we promote human health and well-being? And the purpose of what we're doing as organizations doesn't change just because we're using AI. And so as leaders in our organizations and in our professional fields, we should just be thinking about how do we use AI as a tool to achieve the goals that are really at the center of what we're doing, which is improving human lives.
Well, man, that's a tough group to follow there. But I will tell you, I think this is great conversation. And as a government official, having the data for 2 million Idahoans, which includes veterans and police officers and just information around infrastructure and tax information and businesses, the responsibility feels really, really heavy on our side. And it feels that way because, one, we have to protect the data. And I'm sorry, Alberto Gonzalez, CIO for the state of Idaho. I guess I should have started there. Been with the state for about 20 years and take a lot of pride being here and really always looking to really trying to make government better. But I think the responsibility of the data that we have for our citizens, but also the decisions we make to provide credentials or benefits is where I really get scared about AI. How do we make sure that it's not biased? How do we make sure that it's really just relying on either federal or state rules and that it isn't something that's leaning one way or the other? We're just being really, non-biased, I guess. And then also that the public knows if we're using it. And those are a few of the things that we've been looking at. Ethically, I think we want to make sure that people know we're using it and that we're using it properly. And excited to have a conversation with you all.
Thank you, Richard. I want really go ahead. I want to start with you with this first question too, because, as the last 2 days, I was hosting an iTech Summit in the Magic Valley, meeting with leaders there and about AI adoption. And when I think about the pressure, there definitely is a pressure to adopt AI. So, from the government perspective, and of course, Corey and you each will have a different perspective on this, but in your lens, how do leaders balance that innovation and speed with responsible implementation? Because there is that feeling of, if I'm not first, I'm last. But if I'm not first, I can learn from other people. But I definitely think that there is that pressure right now to adopt the latest, the greatest, and jump all in without maybe making sure whether there's water in the deep end.
I think I've always been a big fan of automation, not just in the AI space, but machine learning and other form of automation. So to me, it makes government so much better. And the DMV is one of those areas where I think we show it over and over again. But I also think that people are concerned to make such a drastic move in the way they do business that there's a little bit of fear to adopt the technology because they don't know that, we need some data hygiene. We need to have really clear business requirements. We need to have some really good testing. And right now, we created a framework, which I'll paste into the chat real quick. It's too long. There is an executive summary if you guys want to read it. But the whole point there was here's a roadmap on how you can adopt responsibly some AI in your government agency. But I still think that there's more people that are wanting to wait to see what others do instead of the prior one that you mentioned, which was like first in or you're last. I think there's more of a let's wait and see what others do. Which is disappointing to me because I would love everyone to just crash the doors down and start using AI wherever it's possible. But data hygiene has been the biggest obstacle. And so I think right now, I would say in state government, there's a little bit more sort of like excitement, but let me wait and see versus excitement to let's go do something really transformational right now.
I think to jump off on that, I mean, part of me is I don't know that it's really a possibility to kind of hold off and just see how other folks are going to do it because I think depending on the size of your organization, the reality is if you're part of a big organization, people in your organization are going to be using AI. And I think the question is whether are they using public versions of AI on their phone that you don't really know about, or are they using enterprise versions of AI that you've adopted as an organization and are making sure the terms and services match, your obligations as an organization and that you're able to kind of effectively implement and manage how folks in your organization are using the AI. And so to me, as a leader, if you're a leader and really in any field, you just have to accept the reality that AI is going to be part of your organization. And if you want to be kind of at the forefront of how your organization is actually using it, you need to kind of lean in and embrace it and make sure you as an organization are thinking through adoption strategies and not just leaving it to, who in your organization might be doing XYZ on Claude on their phone.
So that's a really good point. I want to clarify that real quick. Government is embracing the use of like Copilot and ChatGPT and Gemini at a very high rate. That part is being done, and we have some rules around it. Really specific rules around what kind of data, level 1, 2, 3, or 4 data. We're very, very mindful of that. What I talk about is like fully automating integrations into like a system of record, right? Integrating into the tax system, integrating into the DMV, integrating into the labor system. That's a whole different level. You have some LLMs, you have some integrations. That's where I think people are being reluctant, not in the use of what I think you're talking about, Corey, which is the employee assistant. Like you said it earlier, like this is just a system that's going to help them be more efficient and do things really great. But what I talk about is like, how do we fully automate a process and save time or make it more accurate or save the public a lot of time and increase the accuracy? That's where I'm at. But I agree with you. We cannot just let them use whatever they want without any guidelines. We have to lean into that. So I don't disagree. And I'm sure Anka and Katya can probably add to that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think there is not a way for eliminate risks in using AI. So organization should, everybody should accept that innovation comes with risk, right? So the question is how we can handle these risks. And I think a way at least should be having governance strategies in terms of both management and compliance. And so I think organizations should focus on indeed AI compliance governance strategies where they, for example, can educate employees in using AI and try, honestly, in these days, I think there is some confusion between what organizations allow to use and what employees are actually using. And so, I think organizations should be clear on that. And that's part of compliance, I believe.
I agree, Katya. I think that's very important, but I think a lot of the organizations, they think they need to start with the policy when they actually need to start with the decision, like when they implement AI. And Alberto, I totally get what you're coming from, especially in the global event industry. We have a lot of data that is scattered all over the place, all over platforms. So automation and workflows, that is all that we think about at the strategy level, because while, government agencies have a similar problem, the event industry has exactly that problem. Only it's a little bit more different in the sense that it touches not just the event organizer, it also touches the attendees. And there's a lot of data that travels in both directions, and nobody really seems to know where exactly it lives. So coming back to the decision framework, I think it has to, the decision has to be made. Like when we think about implementing tools, when we think about agentic AI, what can this tool access, right? What can it retain? Like what can it share? What can it change? Who reviews the output? Who can stop it? I've had situations where AI was implemented in mass and they did not have a kill switch and things started going really wrong, and it took quite a few steps to get that stopped and then go back to figure out and review what exactly went wrong and where, right? So I think every meaningful AI needs to have a named owner. When we think about organization, who has the ownership of what happens, not just some kind of vague committee. Everybody loves to have an AI champion, but do they have the authority to make decision, right? Not just be, oh, if the AI vendor has created the solution, I'm sure they have things in place to stop it. No, do not assume, because that's not always the case, right? So yes, a policy documenting is great, but many times that sits in a folder. Like I'm glad to review the 2025 Idaho AI policy. We're already talking about a year late, right? To see what that looks like. But really, we have to move with the technology, and we have to assign responsibility in order for not just create incentives to create responsible AI usage, but also to make sure that employees are not just rewarded for speed, right, and adoption and making sure that they use it, but they also use it responsibly and ethically. And that's where I think a lot of the ethical AI conversation shows up, because at the end of the day, you need to decide authority and ownership of any decision that is being made in the AI space, so you know who to go to. How many of you have been, on a phone call these days trying to solve something? I'm actually in the middle of this whole fraud generated by AI that I'm dealing with, and I'm trying to speak to a human and I cannot get to the human. Like I get to a lot of AI bots out there, but they do not have the context, nor do they have the understanding of what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Well, we will touch on that in just a few minutes, Anka, like what you're talking about, that human element that still needs to be involved. But before we do that, we're going to pin that. I want to go back and thread the needle a little bit on some of the things I heard from all of you, and I'm probably going to start with you first, Corey. When I think about, because I'm hearing that leaders need to be having the conversations, we know that employees are using it. I heard one of you say, are they using it on their phones? I know that licenses are expensive. I will tell you that in the last 2 days, there was a leader on my stage at my iTech Summit talking about that they identified around 500 of their employees were using some type of an AI platform outside of any type of organizational structure. And I don't remember how long ago it was, because since then they've put in all kinds of, when we talk about firewalls, I hear you talk about risk, Corey. I'm thinking about let's break this down for our viewers, because one of the things that everyone agrees with is that there should be some risk mitigation for companies. Data leaks are a thing. Like we need to have some sidewalls. And so when I think about, there's the data privacy element, right? Having employees that are putting your own data about your company out in the AI, I almost said the World Wide Web. We're not there anymore. That's also yesterday. But we also think about the transparency, the human oversight. Like I think several of you said, like, who is the leader in charge of making that decision, that liability decision of their employees and what they're using? Also, employee training. This particular leader was very transparent and very vulnerable on our stage, and saying what they chose to do is they knew that the innovation, Alberto, you talked about automations and solving problems. And this is an Idaho employer. And he was talking about, we knew that some of our next innovation was going to come from our employees. We wanted them using AI tools. So we created different little pockets of teams. We gave them access. We gave them licenses. We created sidewalls. And some did great and some didn't. And when the ones that kind of didn't, he's like, honest, there were people we gave them to that never even logged in. So we took those licenses and went on to another little. I was thinking it kind of sounded like the AI hackathon within businesses, right? But so Corey, I want to kind of start with you. Like, that's kind of like, what guardrails should every organization consider before deploying those AI tools? Like, what's a good, just very basic, what are the things we want to leave with all of those that watch this later or are watching it right now? What are like the first 3 to 4 steps that they should be taking if they agree with everything that you've all said already? What should they be doing first?
So a couple thoughts there. I mean, I think the first thing before I answer your question is I feel like this really drives home to me, which is a different topic, but really just kind of the importance of culture generally in your organizations and how leaders are responsible for cultivating that culture, right? Because I agree with the point Anka made, like policies are great, but if it's the 2025 policy and it's in a folder somewhere and no one actually reads it, that it could be the perfect policy, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And so policies are really only as good as the culture that we're building around them, and that's a separate kind of leadership conversation to be had, but just kind of wanted to start there because I think that's an important part of any of this conversation. But in terms of the policy itself, I think the first thing you need to be thinking about is, at least from my perspective as a lawyer, is kind of like, what industry are you in and what location are you particularly doing business in, right? Because if you're in healthcare, obviously you have your own set of HIPAA obligations, or if you work in critical infrastructure, you have your own set of obligations there. And so, what regulations exist, or if you're government, right, you're responsible to the taxpayers. And so whatever industry you're in, that's going to dictate to some extent what kind of external regulations and interests you need to keep in mind. And then the other one is location, right? Because right now we don't have any sort of universal regulation on AI. And so if you're operating in the EU, there's a pretty robust AI regulations that exist in the EU that you need to make sure you're complying with. And if you're in the United States, there's states like California or Colorado or Texas that are more comprehensive at this point in how they're approaching AI regulation, whereas maybe other states are just targeting things like employment or whatever. So you need to be mindful of where you're operating and what laws are dictating that, because then that's going to kind of control or answer like, hey, what are the things that I need to control for to make sure I'm not really stepping far afield of something. And so then once you know, hey, what are the issues that I need to control for? I think you then need to think about what are the tools that would be helpful within my company that could help our folks do what they need to do, and make sure that you're then identifying the tools that both work to help people in your organization, but also have the terms and conditions or the enterprise licenses or whatever it might be to make sure you're accounting for those issues that we talked about before. And then I think you also need to think about how you're going to enforce them, right? I mean, again, you got to make sure that if you have these policies in place that you're actually following them. Otherwise, they're not protecting you from anything. And so that kind of goes back to my first point about having cultures that are implementing and following those policies.
I want to jump on that really quick because I think it's also very important to understand where AI is already being used, because you cannot govern something that you don't see, right? Like shadow AI. You alluded to that, Diana, earlier. But then I also think you have to give your employees a safe and useful approved option. And useful is the keyword here, because if you have an enterprise tool, somebody in the chat mentioned Microsoft Copilot, a lot of enterprise accounts use Microsoft, right? But if you give them a tool that is too hard or is just not useful to access and it does not help them do the work, obviously you're going to have people do it in their preferred version of the tool, in a way that is hidden, in a way that removes the organization from the visibility of actually what happens with their own data. Then you also have to make sure that your data rules are painfully clear. I've seen so many policies where it's very ambiguous. Like, people need black and white. Like, when I say that you cannot use this AI tool on this contract, I actually mean that you cannot run this contract through the AI tool. It's black and white, it's straight up, and it's clear. There's people there, they still have to guess, well, what do you mean by, this file? What do you mean by this list? What do you mean by this source code that I can write? Like it has to be clear with examples. This is what you can do. This is what you cannot do. So that when there is some enforcement, then there is also a clear reasoning why that enforcement happened in the first place. And then again, I go to the fourth pillar for me is always that human owner. Somebody needs to be responsible and accountable, especially when you have use cases and you have data and you have things that have been touched and and the outcome that has to follow to someone that needs to be able to answer. Because I don't think the goal is to make every employee some kind of an AI risk expert, because they're not going to become that. I think the goal is to make the responsible path the easiest path to follow.
Yeah, jumping on what Corey said about AI regulation, I think, I mean, definitely organizations should be looking to this type of regulation that have been already applied, like in the European Union. But I mean, it's kind of even broader than that, I think. I mean, they should also consider privacy and security regulation when they are in place, because, of course, I mean, some risks that are created by AI are indeed related to privacy and security as well, because one of the issues that sometimes it came up is that somebody is indeed using as an input personal data of clients, colleagues. And so, I mean, I think the organization should be really clear on which type of privacy protection and security protection are in place to protect clients, colleagues, other employees' data, right?
Go ahead, Alberto. You came back on, but to add to that, Alberto, what I would like to hear from you too is like as we're hearing about how we implement, how we plan. I know that you've spent a lot of deep conversations about this with not just legislators but business owners and industry. What opportunities and risks concern you the most as AI becomes embedded in everyday life?
Well, I will say back to what everyone was saying, when we gave guidance on the tools that we wanted, and there's a question in your chat too about like what tools are good, what tools are not good. We did choose specific tools, and some of them were part of the licensing we already had. Others we required them to get the enterprise contract editions, not all these OpenAI. Everybody has different flavors. We want to provide choice, and so really we're going with like Gemini, Copilot, ChatGPT for starters until we figure out what the licensing looks like. We're also partnering with Boise State. They built something that I think is going to be very useful. City of Boise, Ada County, myself. We're all looking at like doing some sort of like a co-op of some kind to create a lower cost option because it can get very expensive. And all of us want to do the same thing to protect the data and create a very segmented version of AI so that we can do what we want without opening it up to the rest of the world. And I think Corey would like it to be more tidied up from a legal perspective than for us to just be using these open AI tools. One of the things that we did around guardrails, which is what you were asking, we did negotiate with human resources that we would require a mandatory AI training, just like you do respectful workplace, just like you do cyber security. We thought AI is becoming a thing that everybody's using. 2 years ago, 25% of the workforce was using AI. But we know that this year it's more like 75% of the workforce is using AI. But we want them to use the guidance that we give them around the data that's allowed, that, like I think Anka was talking about, this contract does not go here, this data doesn't go there. Trying to really guide them, but also understanding that people are humans. The internet, we gave them guidance. Email, we gave them guidance, but people don't always do that. So our security teams are trying to do everything they can to monitor any sort of abnormal use of AI tools or any abnormal use or activity around AI related stuff. And one of the things we also did around guardrails is we worked with the Department of Procurement to make sure that they updated the language around anybody that we go anybody that we do contract with, whether it's software or hardware, that we understand whether or not AI is a component and that they have to agree to abide by the Idaho rules. And so we thought that was a really critical point. Our privacy officer helped us with that. Our AI architect helped us draft a lot of that language. Those are some of the guardrails that we use around that space. Hopefully I didn't miss your question.
No, actually, that's really great. Actually, I didn't want to get us too off topic, but I wanted to pause a second and thank you for all the work you're doing. Like, I think that Idaho is, we lead the pack in a lot of ways across our neighboring states and partners, but just in the work that I've done in with other states in AI is I think that some of the things that you describe, Alberto, is not just something that Idaho needs to not just take for granted that that work is being done and that you guys are being progressive and about recognizing. I love when you shared that data that we already recognize 75% are going to be using it, and because of that, we need to have those guardrails and those trainings. So I love the answer that you shared. I would open to all of you though, as we know that this is the case, like how transparent, and then I really want to make sure we get to the human intelligence side of artificial intelligence before we go to Q&A with our guests. How transparent should the state be? Should workers be? Should industry, education in the legal space? How transparent should we be about our use of AI? When is it appropriate to say this was written by, or when is it just great to push out a great email that used AI to make it look a lot better? Let's talk about the transparency that organizations should think about with their use of AI, and how does it affect trust? How does transparency affect trust? So that's kind of the question. You can each take kind of your own angle too.
I can answer as an instructor that deal every day with students using AI for performing assignment, right? And basically, it's a similar situation of a manager dealing with employees using AI. And so I ask my students to be transparent about they use AI, because if they are not transparent with me, I cannot trust them, right? And so trust is an important asset in every organization. It can be education, it can be healthcare, it doesn't really matter. Trust is important asset to build a relationship. And so, for example, in my interaction with students, I just ask them, okay, if you want to use AI, you can, as long as you tell me, how did you use AI? Did you use AI for brainstorming? Did you use AI to build your presentation or to write the entire paper? Of course, there are limitations, but I want that they start to learn how to be transparent, because transparent builds trust, and this is essential in every relationship.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. As far as I'm concerned, when I think of the level of transparency, I think it needs to rise to the level of consequence. So, like, for example, if I use AI to organize my own notes or like a meeting notes, right? That's different from like using AI to say hiring processes and screening candidates, right? Like ranking employees when I do performance reviews, or, determining who has access and who doesn't have access. All of that depends, because it affects someone's future, especially in hiring processes. I work with so many event professionals that are right now in the middle of like this, space where they feel like their job was taken by AI, but they don't have any other opportunity now, no other options, right? So when I think of the role that AI plays, it has to be tied to the consequential decisions. People need more than just a notice where it says AI was used in the qualification for this candidate. Is there a recourse? If that AI decided that I'm not a good enough candidate, I need to recourse. I need to know who can I speak to be able to actually figure out, like, why did AI come up with this conclusion, right? What information did it rely on? Alberto brought up AI biases. I do want to say, when it comes to AI biases, AI didn't invent biases. That is what we as a human race have had for a very long time. The problem with AI is now it's actually amplifying it at scale. What I thought that was a bias in my own industry I was dealing with, now it's amplified everywhere and it's way, way faster, right? So going back to the transparency part, transparency without recourse, I don't think it builds trust. It just tells you that a system was affected, and that gives me absolutely no way to figure out how can I solve this issue or where can I go next to get a better response. And I don't think people necessarily expect that technology will be perfect. That's not going to happen. But they do expect organizations to be accountable when something goes wrong in the use of AI.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Maybe I'm a little too simple or naive in how I see it, but I don't see any downside in transparency, because I think if you're concerned that people are going to know that you're using AI to do a task, that probably reveals that there's something behind there that you don't want them to know. And if you don't want them to know that, that's probably a bigger issue, right? And that you haven't quite figured out how to use AI responsibly or to address the biases in AI or whatever the case might be. And so, that to me, it's like, well, then you need to make sure you're taking the ownership to address that concern. And if if the fix is to just not be transparent about it, that to me is indicative of a bigger problem that as an organization you need to address.
That is true, Corey, but I will add there was this Fortune story that came out about AI being used to rewrite the resume of two side-by-side candidates. And AI wrote the entire resume, and each resume looked exactly the same. The only difference was whose name was at the top. You had Mary and you had Joe. And then they used human reviewers to decide whose resume was a stronger resume. The human reviewers had two different type of biases. One, they decided that just because Joe used AI in his resume, it's acceptable because, hey, he needed a little bit of help. But Mary using AI in her resume, she was seen as not qualified enough, like she's not capable. That's why she needs more help. So there's already this stereotyping that happens just because you use AI and you're transparent about using AI, right? And then the other side of that is, well, why did you need to rewrite your resume with AI, right? And the biases comes not just from the AI side, but also from the human side. So you're fighting like this a two-headed monster, especially if you are in a disadvantaged position as a person, as a who knows, what might be the situation you're in.
So I have a slightly different take on this. And it's funny because, I said earlier, I love automation, right? And so in 2008, we put together the health and welfare system, which would take people applying for Medicaid, and we're talking billions of dollars, right? People applying for food stamps, or we would look at childcare, or we would look at child support. And everything was programmed and automated. Much of it we would do through, APIs or automation, but a human coded the way we would look for data, the way we would extract data, the way we would act on data. And we never disclosed that we did it through automation. And so to me, at times, it feels like, how much do we have to disclose? Because sometimes I get nervous about the expectation that we do too much disclosure around AI, because I used email to respond to you. That phone call you took was AI supported because we're doing that in a lot of cases. The type of automation we have today prior to AI includes, like, if you all live in Idaho, I think, right? If I'm not mistaken, I think we have some Meridian, some Boise, et cetera. So if you registered your car with that QR code at all, nobody touches it until they pick up the mail. So you scan it, we protect your data, it goes into the system of record, it then sends it to the printer, that then the print machine actually folds that paper that they send you. It used to be the stickers, you're not going to get stickers anymore. And then we stuff it in an envelope. The first time a human touches that is when they're picking up that mailbox to take it to the post office and drop it off. And so to me, it feels like we've been doing automation. We've been doing human developed sort of intelligence, I guess. And so to me, I struggle with it a little bit because I don't know how far we go, but I am committed, especially after talking to the AI committee in the House and Senate, and then hearing from, you mentioned hiring practices, which I thought was really good, Anka. K through 12 is really struggling with this, and they're making sure that teachers know what's appropriate, students know what's appropriate. In law, Corey, the Chief Justice made sure that the courts are making sure that what are lawyers allowed to use? How many briefs are you allowed to use AI with? And so I think there are some elements of our government where it's a little bit more stringent, and we should do that. But I think we've been doing automation for a long time. So I don't have the answer. I'm giving you I'm just
I think it's also related, Alberto, to the type of risk we are talking about, right? So if AI brings a high risk, like you categorize people, I want to know, right? Instead, if the risk is low in the sense, okay, you use AI to create an audio or a presentation. Okay, I mean, probably the risk is so low that it's fine if I don't know. So it depends on the type of risks that are involved with AI. So that's what I think, and that's why I use different levels of transparency with my students, for example.
Yeah. And I think there's a high concern with, who holds the power when it comes to that. Like, who decided that whatever this use was is acceptable, and then who benefits from it? Because there's a lot of risk that gets carried. And then, if that's the case, also, who has the power to object to whatever the policy is? And I think that going back to the power, like how you have people funding different tools for different reasons. We already seen in the media, this power struggle between OpenAI and Anthropic and how it's affecting our government. I mean, just this model that I was building systems on, Fable 5, is gone. And I'm like, what? What is this? What's going on? Like, there's a lot that's happening behind the scenes. And it's not just, in the funding, but it's in designing, in the profiling, in the how this system are actually creating themselves as providing opportunities or not, but who are they creating those opportunities for, right? So I think there's a lot to be discussed when it comes to that, because to me, it's when convenience replaces judgment, I think, and then you have also efficiency and productivity that replaces the care of how those systems are being implemented. That's when it becomes a bit of an ethical conversation, and there's a lot of risk involved with that.
Yeah, I can remember being at Microsoft and hearing Dr. Fei-Fei Li speak. She's from Stanford. She wrote the book The Worlds I See, and she stood on that stage and she said, AI was created by human for human consumption. So when we go back to kind of the theme of this webinar today, designing with intention. So AI and ethics, the responsibility, we're really talking to the leaders and the decision makers. I think that we've heard that from all of you today. And then that designing with intention, as if you have a question about whether something should be transparency about it, I'm sure you could reach out to Corey and he would kind of help you walk through that. Because I do agree, like there's some things like say a rewritten email or just like a slide deck, things like that. So if what I'm creating, someone else is going to be making a decision based on that information, you've got to bring that human element always back. I don't think any first iteration in AI is ever correct out of the first. People do business with people. We are still very much a relationship human population, but you can't argue that this is the most incredible of all the GPTs, and I'm talking from the telephone and the steam engine and internet and all the things, the cell phone. Another thing that Dr. Fei-Fei Li said is like, this is not even the last thing. It's just today's thing that we're diving into. So, and I think that what she means by saying is it is absolutely not going anywhere. We need to embrace it. We need to embrace it responsibly. So before we close out and then go to our live Q&A, I would love to ask one last question from each of you. Because we want to leave our viewers that watch it later with something really tangible. If you could give one piece of advice to an organization implementing AI today, so you're talking to the decision makers, whether it's the small business owner, someone that's leading a department in a larger corporation or a government agency, what is that one piece of advice you would give them today on implementing an AI tool?
Yeah, I can jump really quickly on that. I mean, I think the advice would be, from my perspective, don't ask yourself how can you use AI, but what are the problems that you have inside your organization that you want to solve through AI. And so the piece of advice that I feel is important is try to align your business with AI models. Because otherwise you are going to implement something that is not going probably to be useful and efficient for your organization. So alignment between business problems and AI models.
100%. I'm definitely with you on that, Katia. And I think with that, because a lot of organizations, right, are starting with the tool because that is the exciting part. But the tool, I think, in so many cases, is the easy part. Aside from what problem are you trying to solve, right? I think there also should be a decision around permissions. What information can you access? What is allowed to do? What is prohibited from doing, right? What can you review? What can it stop? Like all of those things need to be embedded into that decision because the leadership work is deciding not just where AI belongs in the business and the organization, but also what kind of authority should it have and what protections need to exist before you have the first failure, not after. Because in many cases it's easy to have it after, but you need to have it in place before.
I think I would just end where I started, which is to just don't lose sight of why your organization exists. Our organization exists to just address some sort of human need or some sort of human problem. So treat AI as a tool to help advance that goal, but do it always keeping at the forefront what is that human need or that human problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, it's funny because I think it was Katya or Inka, I forget who said it. The tool is the easy part. I think for me, the really difficult part is the data hygiene. And to me, it feels like do a quick data assessment. How good are you? When we talked to, I'll just tell you, it was transportation and HR, and we said, how comfortable are you that we unleash, Copilot into your environment when you have stuff that's filed in places that you don't have role-based controls for? Which means if you have personnel actions, people's salaries, which I guess in government it's transparent anyways, but whatever, there's, hiring decisions. So like how much stuff that shouldn't be out there do you have without categorization, without role-based controls? And so it doesn't hurt to do some data hygiene assessments to see
Mhm.
how good you are. AI made cleaning up data sexy again. So to me, it feels like